Going to go ahead and attribute that particular greeting to a nice frosty glass of homemade lemonade. You know, we don't always keep soda around the house. We're not a big soda drinker house here. I do like one occasionally, like a Dr. Pepper or a Pepsi. But my wife, you know, forever when it came to lemonade, I would do just like Country Time or some kind of mix. And then my wife, you know, she showed me what her family has always done, which is to mix 2 cups of sugar, about maybe a cup. I usually do a little bit closer to a cup and a half of lemon juice, and then just in your gallon jug there, mix it up with the rest of the space being water, and it makes a very delightful lemonade. You know, it's just a couple of basic ingredients. You don't need much more than that, though, and it's a very refreshing drink. Like I say, I like mine a little bit more tart than they do theirs. There's a funny recurring joke with my in-laws, because apparently at one point, my father-in-law tried to make this, and he wound up doing 2 cups of lemon juice to 1 cup of sugar. And while I'm sure it wasn't bad, it was probably way too tart even for me, as someone who enjoys lemons and whatnot. I have always liked the flavor of lemon, and it's we're getting deeper and deeper as we go into the story here, folks. But I have always enjoyed lemon. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, where did the appreciation and enjoyment of lemon come from? Well, oddly enough, my mom, while I was in the womb, actually enjoyed eating lemons. Not just like, biting into a lemon whole scale as you would an apple, but, peeling it as you would an orange and enjoying a lemon in that regard. It just, it's one of those odd things that a pregnant woman, she got a taste for it, and that was one of her things. Not pickles, not ice cream. She liked lemons, so whatever. Maybe that attributes some of the other acidic nature of my personality, if you want to call it that, and whatnot. But it's, we like our lemonade around here. I like, a nice lemon icebox pie occasionally. That's one of the other things that my wife, she always calls me an old soul because I like stuff of that nature. Yeah, I'm just old, period. I grew up with my grandparents, for crying out loud. I ate stuff like egg custard pie and, lemon icebox pies, that kind of thing, because we'd go to the cafeteria there in Rock Hill in South Carolina. If you've never been to that cafeteria there, I forget what, the Jackson's, I think was the name of it. It was always had a great dessert lineup, and that was, a couple of the things that we always enjoyed there, me and my grandmother, when we'd go, out shopping or out for a day together. But, unfortunately, those are days gone by. Old grandma, she's no longer with us, unfortunately. But, it's fun to reminisce. It's fun to do some thinking back on times of old and really push you guys down a rabbit hole with all kind of just nincompoop thoughts that come up in my brain as I'm starting these shows. I always try and do something entertaining to bring these things out. I hope I am bringing out some decent stories there. But, it's also very weird and also very, I'll say, maybe too personal at times. Whatever. How you doing, folks? Glad to be back with you. We missed you last week. Where were you? Or where was I? That was a better question there. Didn't get to record last weekend, unfortunately. Had a little too much going on. We were a little busy with things of certain project nature and whatnot. We were also out and about. Yes, got out and about. Didn't spend the whole weekend cooped up in the house as we have here for the past couple of months. I actually went out and enjoyed ourselves a little bit. We're going to talk about that in the second segment of the show. But, even with having that little bit of a scent, you'll say, of an experience of normalcy there, we're still in good old weird 2020. But now, of course, we're in political season. And before I say this, I'm gonna present a piece of advice that was given to me a long time ago. Whenever I was working for Alltel back a long time ago. People don't even remember what Alltel is now anymore. Alltel was one of the companies that got bought up in one of the telecom mergers over the years. Had a pretty good footprint here in the Southeast. They were based around Arkansas and whatnot, so in SEC country, Southeastern Conference. They were somewhat well known in that part of the world, but I used to work for them. And at one point in one of the sort of sales meetings we had, they were talking about things that we were encouraged to do with our customers as far as conversation is concerned. Because, there were times where you're activating equipment and whatnot where you're going to have some quiet moments there. And it's one of those things where you don't want to be in total dead silence around people. You want to have some type of conversation going there. And plus it helps to build rapport with your customer. But they told us several things to never talk about around your customer because of how divisive you potentially can create a situation. And that was religion and politics. Today we're going to talk a little bit about politics. Not going to touch religion. I'm not quite that strong yet, maybe, or bold, I guess I should have said. But politics, of course, we're in the political season now. Because we're actually, yes, at the point in time I'm recording this, we are right at 1 month away from the November 2020 general election, where we will decide the president of the United States for the next 4 years. And, oh boy, did we get off to a crazy start here the other night with that first debate. Did you watch that thing? I know I'm a little bit behind here in talking about this because it's a couple days old now, but man alive, did you watch that thing? This had to be the most incredulous situation, whatever you want to call it, of any political debate of the modern era. Now, you can't go back in the time to those eras of people like Theodore Roosevelt and all those guys being around. I'm sure they had some crazy shit going on in whatever kind of format they used to debate in. I'm sure they had debates back in that era. But man alive, just, this thing here, I tried to compare it to anything that you could really think of. Of course, the only real justifiable comparison is something like the Jerry Springer show. And that's the honest to God's truth. Because this is just, you have, and even if you pay attention to various international news sites and whatnot, like I was trying to watch the BBC's coverage of this thing because they do a much more sort of flatline, not really all sort of rah-rah, sis-boom-bah, barking heads type thing. Theirs is a little bit more easy to consume and to digest than most of our news channels around here. Definitely Fox News, CNN, any of the cable news channels, you can just go and put that to bed immediately because, for one, you're going to be you're going to be inundated by graphics that are pretty difficult to really get past. But also then you have the personalities of whoever's covering that thing to be, pushed aside there as well. So I enjoyed the BBC's coverage, but man, it's such a just crazy presentation for one, because you have the two old men there, as we've already more or less accepted that this is going to be our fate here, who are going to be the next president in some way, shape, or form. And when they get into it, it's of course a sparring match there between one another. And they have the rules that have been presented to where it's like, okay, well, you'll get 2 minutes, then you get your time, and then you get the response to that. And immediately they start barking at each other in such a way that that's not going to be, the rules are not going to matter at all. They've sort of, they've gotten, if you were to put it in wrestling context, they've signed an agreement to have a traditional wrestling match, and then somebody brings in a ladder. And the referee says, okay, well, I'll allow it. What? And it just kept going downhill from there in terms of the way this thing devolved into just a shouting match. And it really is a farce at this point in time. There is no point to continuing these things. I would say probably better than 90% of people have already made up their minds as to who they're voting for. If you haven't, I'd be shocked. I would say better than 90%. I think most people already could say, if the election were to happen tomorrow, that they have already made up their mind. And this debate probably solidified that for a lot of people in more than one way. Because you had so many things that were just talked about and really hammered home in terms of not only the way one versus another would choose to handle whatever given topic you're talking about there, but also just, in terms of the cadence and the ability to handle yourself in a scenario like that. Now, it was very disrespectful the whole way around. The moderator there, he lost control very early on. The joke was we needed somebody other than this guy to be the moderator. And you have all the memes that come out saying, oh, we're going to have Samuel L. Jackson be the moderator next time, or Medea, or someone new who could get in there and seemingly be a controller of these two men. And I don't, even if the personalities of those people were genuine in some way, shape, or form, I still don't think you would get to a point where either of these guys would actually listen to what they had to say, because they're just going to get in there and they're going to run their mouths. Even with Biden telling Trump to shut up at one point in time. Made no difference whatsoever. Trump's not going to shut up, and Biden, he's not going to, he shouldn't rear back either, to be honest with you, because if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, So this whole disrespectful thing, this farce went over, and, again, looking at the international reaction of this, it's like people know how bad it is here in terms of our leadership. I don't think people internationally look bad, or they don't look down upon us as the citizenry. They look at the people that we have up there, and they're just like, what in the world? And I kind of think they have to look down on us in some regard, because we did choose most of these people and put them in office ourselves. But that's where the breakdown happens there between them seeing, okay, well, not everybody voted for the one that's there now. There were some who didn't. But there were a lot who did. I wasn't one of them. I didn't vote for either of the main parties last time. I'm probably not voting for either of the main parties this time either. But be that as it may, in the days that have transpired since the debate, the other big news of the day, of course, the president and Melania and a lot of their associates have tested positive for COVID-19. And some of the timelines suggest that there's a possibility he was likely either sick or in some way, shape, or form already exposed when the debate took place. So you have the potential for him to have gotten up on that stage. Now, granted, they didn't shake hands. They didn't really come near each other. But you had the potential for him to have been up on that stage knowingly carrying the virus and being potentially capable of spreading it. And yet he was still there. And yet he did several other things in the days following that, which had him in situations to where he was not wearing a mask, but he was still appearing in public. He was not wearing a mask, but he was still around a lot of people. And it's like, what were you thinking? And of course, people will say he probably wasn't thinking at all. And that's, realistically, that's probably true. That, or he was thinking, I'm fine. I'll be fine. Whatever. But just the situation there, a lot of people have said, it's ironic, it's karma, it's whatever, in saying, oh, look at that. The big orange, what, got sick. After all these months of saying it's not a big deal, it's not something that, we should be worried about, he got sick. Ha ha. Now he's got to deal with his own, comeuppance and whatnot. And, this has been nothing but another divisive moment for our country, in my opinion. Because you have people who, of course, don't like Trump. I'm not a fan of his either, I'll go ahead and say. But you have the people who are not fans of his, and then you have the people who are not fans of his and want him to die from this thing. And it's been very telling to look at social media and whatnot, because I'm of one of these people who says it's terrible, the things that he's said, things that he's done, but I still wouldn't wish death on somebody. I mean, or suffering in some way, shape, or form. It's one of those deals where it's like, okay, I would like to think I have enough moral character to, even if it's someone that I didn't really agree with. Now here's where I'll draw the line. If it was someone who had, in some way, shape, or form, personally injured me, my family, my son, my wife, my mom, anybody along those lines, then yeah, I could probably see where wishing death on them is perfectly justifiable. But just, this is a guy who, realistically, what involvement does he have in my day-to-day life? Really and truly not that much. So to wish that they in some way, shape, or form would suffer because of this, I'm not really sure how I think about that. I don't think I agree with it. But at the same time, so many people have such a big problem with Trump and with the notion that he's brought forth, or the notions that he's brought forth as president. I don't know. It's real hard to digest a lot of this, folks, because I know people are upset. I know people think that a lot of this is, the conditions that we're in are his fault. But it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, can we at least be mature enough not to say, okay, we wish you were dead, that kind of thing. Whatever. I don't know. I'm probably going to put a lot of people out of my favor in saying some things of that nature, but I don't agree with him. I didn't vote for him. I don't support, I'd say better than 90% of the things that he has to say. But I'm not going to be one of those people who says, yeah, he deserves to die from COVID, or that his family deserves to die from COVID. It just is what it is. I can't go that far with this. I hope he recovers. I hope he comes out of this okay. It would be very bad if he did not recover, obviously, for our country, because within this narrow of a timeline, I'm not real sure what would happen, because your actual president at that point, if he were to succumb to the virus, would be Mike Pence, the vice president. So then suddenly, are we voting for him versus Biden? What's that going to be like? It's just a crazy, crazy thing. And like I said before, it's a crazy, crazy year. And it's going to continue to be all the way down through Election Day. Because as I was talking earlier in the segment, we're less than a month away from Election Day here in this country. And suddenly there's talk of all this stuff related to the election, about the difficulties with absentee voting, mail-in voting. And some of that I have personal dealing with, because my occupation deals with local government, and part of it is supporting a elections office. So you have all these concerns about absentee voting, concerns about violence at the polls. There were that, I don't even know what it was. I haven't really looked into it, but the statement where I guess Trump said something that was some kind of a trigger towards a white supremacist group. I mean, what the heck was that? And it just, lunacy abounds here, people. Anything you can do to not contribute to this, please, please, please do it. If that means getting an absentee ballot, or voting early, whatever your state classifies it as. People in South Carolina, they believe that they have the right and ability to vote early. Technically, you don't. Technically, you're engaging in what's called absentee voting, where you have to have some kind of a reason for not being able to participate on the actual election day. Well, the thing of that is, when you go to apply for an absentee ballot, they ask you, well, what's your reason for not being able to come to the polls? But they're not going to check behind you. If you tell them, you're going to be off work that day, or if you have to work that day, they're not going to call your boss and say, oh, yeah, this is so-and-so, the such and such county election office is so-and-so there today. Oh, he is. Oh, well, fantastic. He's got a legitimate reason. or if the other cheek were to be turned there and you weren't at work, they're not going to check behind you. Period is the point here. So you can tell them whatever. If you want to get an absentee, get an absentee. If you don't want to be there on election day, because Lord knows people are now saying, "Oh, there's going to be violence at the polls, violence. There's going to be this, that, and the other." There's no credible evidence that I'm aware of that whatsoever. And again, it's one of those deals to where in certain parts of the country, maybe, sure, it might happen. But in small areas like where we're from, where I live, I don't see it happening. I don't see that being a concern for us. But still, we're very close, as I mentioned, to the election. Still encourage you to participate in some way, shape, or form. If you're listening to this now, since we're within a month of the election, you probably are at a point where unless you've already registered, you won't be able to get registered to participate in this election. But, if you're registered, if you can vote, find some way to participate. There are way too many things going on that you can have a decision, or that you can have a hand in making the decision for this country right now to not participate in some way, shape, or form, either through absentee voting or voting in person. Just check it out, man. Just do what you can. Get involved in some way, shape, or form. I think most of the election staff around the country have probably already been solidified. If not, they're probably getting pretty close because there's lots of opportunities normally to volunteer to participate as an election staff member working at the polls. And that was something that, a lot of our local offices had a struggle with because in COVID world, as we are, there was, a move towards trying to encourage a younger volunteer force to work as poll managers and poll staff because they're all volunteers. There are no actual full-time poll workers in this country. There, of course, are election staff that work at each county office, but there's no full-time election staff in terms of the people that man the individual polling stations. So if you have an opportunity to volunteer, if you're not doing anything, if you're able to get out of work or school or whatever for that day, see if you can volunteer. There are offices all around the country that'd be glad to have you. Because really all it takes is an able body. It's one of those things where you hate to say, oh, well, all we need is a warm body for this to work properly. But really and truly, it's pretty much it. Election systems, they're not difficult anymore. They're not really hard to get around in. Not near what they were whenever I first started working with these things. So if you have a chance and you want to volunteer, get involved. There's plenty of opportunities. But in some way, shape, or form, just participate in the election period. If you're going to vote, vote. If you want to vote and be a poll manager or whatnot, fantastic. If you want to, even get really involved and actually run for an office, oh, now you're just hot shit, aren't you? But good for you. I'm glad for you. I'm proud of you to have that kind of wherewithal to want to go forward with something like that. But, it's one of those things where we want to encourage people to participate, period. Because as a person who's involved in a lot of the prep work that goes into making sure an election goes down from a technical standpoint, we want to make sure people are there. And from the look of things, we've had tremendous turnout already in terms of people coming in for absentee ballots and whatnot. We actually get underway at the office that I'm with this week in terms of in-person absentee voting, and that's going to be crazy. That's really going to be something else there. So we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to seeing how this whole thing shakes down, whether you vote for Biden, whether you vote for Trump, or whether you vote third party, whatever. Participate. That's the main thing there. In some way, shape, or form, get involved and be a part of what will almost certainly be the biggest election of our lifetime. So we're going to call it a day for our political talk here. We're going to take a break. We're going to get some tunes rolling here. We'll be back in a few to talk about something much more interesting, something that is also fighting, but is also much more entertaining, and that being pro wrestling. Be back here in a few, folks. Stay tuned. again, welcome back. Thank you for continuing to hang out with us here on the Weekly Trim podcast. I don't even think I mentioned the podcast name or the date or any of that normal stuff that I get into in the first segment there. Was so riled up about wanting to get into what we had going there and that kind of crazy first story I started off on. Didn't mention anything about the fact that this is the October 5th, 2020 edition of the program. And we are glad to have you with us here on the Rasslin Redbeard YouTube channel or the Anchor.fm platform or wherever else you might be consuming this content. We appreciate you being out there and being involved with what we're doing. And if you want to hang around, give us a comment, like, subscription, all that cool stuff that us as online entities are supposed to beg you for, that would be fantastic. So we appreciate your patronage, appreciate your involvement with what we're doing here on the old Weekly Trim podcast with yours Beardly. So now so I talked about in the opening segment there how last weekend, I didn't have a chance to record a show, but I was just plain busy. I had a lot going on. And the main thing that took up most of my Saturday afternoon anyway, my Saturday morning is always laundry. It's almost always laundry. And it's my laundry. I don't do my wife's laundry, but I do my laundry. I do my son's laundry. I do our towels. It takes up a good bit of time. That's 3 big loads of laundry there. But it got into the afternoon, and guess what? It was time to go to the wrestling matches. Hadn't seen a show since, I think it was January. I want to say it was roughly 8 months almost to the day between the last show we went to before COVID World became a thing and this show here. And oddly enough, I think it was even for the same promotion, that being Palmetto Championship Wrestling. 2 different venues, 2 different scenarios entirely, because the previous show we went to with them, they had the misfortune of this was a brand new ring they had just gotten, but it uses the WWE style ropes, which if you're not familiar with ring construction and whatnot, typically wrestling rings are going to use one of 2 things for their ropes, quote unquote ropes. One of them is actual steel cable that has sort of a hydraulic tubing out on the outside of it. Those are more common. That's what, for example, like companies like Ring of Honor, Impact, a lot of your major independent promotions use things of that nature. Pretty much the only one who uses real ropes is WWE. And there's, often people think that they're bungee cords because of the fact they look like they're stretching and whatnot. It's not that they're stretching, they're actually just being hit with enough force that they're being pulled in one direction or another. So it's interesting to see, but yeah, it's very much a actual rope and not a bungee cord. But this ring uses the rope style ropes. Talk about a tongue twister there. But at some point during the move of the ring from their training facility there with the Palmetto Wrestling Academy to the venue and putting up the ring and tightening the ropes, one of them popped. And then apparently another one popped. So they were down to basically one rope. Of course, you can't really have a situation like that because the ropes are there in a format to provide stability and to provide a surface for guys to use as containment and for other things. So at that first show back early part of the year, they actually ran with no ropes. It was a cool presentation because it was like blood sport, It's like, oh, we're having blood sport here now. This is awesome. Of course, with no blood or no extreme violence. It was cool from the standpoint of forcing these guys to really be creative with how they were putting their matches together because there were no ropes. But fortunately for the show we went to last weekend, ropes were intact. They look great. This is a big, nice 20 by 20 foot ring that they've got. A lot of rings in this area are either 16 by 16 or 18 by 18. This is an actual 20 footer, so it's a big ring to begin with. But they've got some really cool looking side skirts there at Palmetto Championship Wrestling. Even their turnbuckle pads are very coolly done because they're, again, WWE style turnbuckle pads. They have their logos on them. Very slick presentation all the way around. And this was the first time they had been at this particular venue, which is Seven Oaks Park in the sort of Harbison-Irmo district of Columbia, South Carolina. Didn't really know where I was going when I set off to go to this venue. It turned out to be in a very familiar area. I just had no idea that there was a venue there. This, as I said, this is in the sort of Irmo part of Columbia. If you go to Harbison for shopping or dining, whatever, you probably have driven. Well, I'd say you wouldn't definitely, but you likely have maybe seen or driven by this thing at some point in time, because it's very close to that part of town or Columbia, whatever you want to call it. It's very convenient to get to because it's off the interstate there, so very nice in terms of not having to be a venue that you wind up going 12 miles or 20 miles off the interstate to get to. In some cases, in some backwoods area. This one was very, very prominent in terms of positioning. The thing that was funny, and this is one of those deals that we've experienced before in going to a venue that has sort of a shared space to it, is that when we got there, it was like, and again, you're relying, like at least I was anyway, on Google Maps to tell you where you're going. You wind up going in this area where it's a parking lot, of course. And it's like, where are all these people? There's cars everywhere. Where are all these people? I'm on time. Surely I'm not that late. And it turns out that there are baseball fields attached to the venue, and there's travel ball happening. So you've got all these families and kids and everything else who are there to play baseball, not to see wrestling. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, I hope they had somebody down there handing out flyers to these kids and families. Because even if you've got 200 cars down there and you get just 10% of them to come to your show, then that's a good chunk of change there in terms of potential ticket revenue. Even with that's one of the things we're going to talk about here in a moment. Even with the limitations in terms of the amount of people that they could allow into the venue, even get to a point where you're having to turn people away, and then be done with it. That would be a great thing to have happen. But as we got to where the venue actually was, it was like, oh, okay, well, there's the gymnasium, there's the actual building. Okay, I feel better now because there weren't as many people in that parking lot. There were people already lined up to get into the venue whenever I got there, though, so that was cool to see. And that was one of the worries that I had, was that when wrestling comes back, it's like, are people still going to want it? Are people still going to want to go to shows? And very clearly, yes, they do. Because within short order, there were 50 people in line. Not exactly physically spaced the way you want them to be, but they weren't standing on top of each other. Everyone was wearing masks, though. The promotion did a very good job of putting it out there on social media to say, okay, well, if you're coming to the show, please have your mask ready in advance when you're in line and whatnot. So people were adhering to that. People were listening. So that was a great thing there. As we came into the venue, it was a situation to where you either had your ticket or you were going to buy one, of course. I bought mine in advance. I try and buy mine in advance just because it makes it more simple in terms of getting in to these venues. But once you got in there, you had, for the most part, people who wanted to sit around the ringside area. In those cases, you had some attendants from PCW who were assisting people with their chairs. They didn't have chairs set out in advance. They were taking people with their chairs to wherever they wanted to sit in the arena, setting up the chairs, and then the attendants were actually using some cleansers. I don't know if it was just straight bleach or what, but it was some type of cleanser they were using to clean the chairs before everyone sat down in them. So they were taking every possible consideration there in terms of providing a safe, cleanly, hygienic atmosphere for someone to sit in. And for the most part, you had people who were sitting in groups who were let me back up. They were sitting in groups according to the group that came with. You didn't have a big cluster of like 30 people who just decided, oh, I want to sit right here. They were all spaced out pretty well. And I think overall, I think promotion did a very good job of making sure that this was a safe fan environment. Because even like with me, for example, I'm one who tends to sit back on the bleachers. I like to be in the back of the room because, again, I know how big I am. I know how tall I am. I don't want to be in the way of someone being able to view an event like this. it just, it would get on my nerves if I was someone who paid for a ticket or whatnot, and I don't want to cause somebody to not enjoy an event by virtue of my big bald head being in the way. So I sit at the back. I sit on the bleachers. Even back there, people weren't on top of each other. They were just being courteous and they were being polite. And it was great to see because you had the sense that people all wanted to be there and that they were willing to do what they needed to do in order for this to be a safe environment. So kudos to everyone involved for that. Now, as far as the card is concerned, I don't want to say we had sort of a mishmash of things, but this was sort of your typical PCW roster event, but it was not everybody that you always see there. So it was clear that you've got, I'll say, some concerns probably from certain talent members to say, okay, I'm not quite ready to go back yet, which, that's fine. That's perfectly understandable. But I don't want to say that that's the full truth. It's sort of an assumption of mine based on some things that I've heard and seen talked about and whatnot. But moving forward from there in terms of talking about the actual card itself, you had, I think it was 5 total matches on the event here this evening. I'm trying to thumb through my notes as I'm talking here. But yeah, five matches in total. And started off with a pretty cool moment in that you had 2 kids who were making their debut in the world of professional wrestling, that being referee Jesse Chapman and new wrestler, new talent, Cooper Housley. Cooper's another, and also Jesse are both trainees from the Palmetto Wrestling Academy. They were making their debut this evening, or on that particular evening, involved with a match featuring Tie-Dye Sunrise James Johnson, who himself is pretty much, you might as well go ahead and say, a product of the PWA as well, because he's been training there and with Ethan Case for a very long time. Didn't begin his training there, but he was lucky enough to be able to transition into being a part of that system early on in his training and has improved by leaps and bounds from where he was initially. So fun match there. Definitely you could see the feeling out process is in play for Housley. He was in there with the right guy in terms of Johnson being able to work with him through some things. Didn't feel like a very overly choreographed match, because that's the thing that a lot of new guys, they get in there and they're like, all right, I got to know spot A through F and then the finish. And they want it to be totally broken down in front of them. I didn't get the impression that that was what happened here, because it was some fluidity of the match and a lot of fun just seeing these guys enjoy the opportunity to work together for the first time in public. They were supposed to have all made their debut, Chapman and Housley, that is, back in February. But, of course, that event never happened. So push it forward to September, and suddenly they're now full-fledged members of the roster, and they're able to continue competing now that they are graduates of the PWA. So good on those guys. Look forward to seeing their continued evolution and growth in terms of what they do as things go forward there. The next match on the card kind of evolved out of the first match, because after the first match was over, Beauty and the Peach, that being PJ Ellis and Sammy Ray Vaughan, they emerged out of the back there and started to sort of run down not only Housley but also all the members of the PWA and even the trainer there, Ethan Case. They were talking about how they're the best prospects that ever come out of the PWA, and of course, that led Ethan Case to return and to come out into the event space there, and it winds up that he's challenging PJ Ellis to a match. It was supposed to have taken place later on in the card, but then PJ ran his mouth a little bit more, and it kicked off. Fun combination of things here. You had a scenario breakdown to where PJ was selling an injury, and of course it was fake. Sammy Ray Vaughan got in the ring and low-blowed Case. It was a very convincing ruse that was played out there. Very cool to see that kind of thing involved in a show like this. Not the first time that they've done an injury angle to someone and it be kind of a pulling the rug over someone type moment, but it's still very cool. Very enjoyable match. Case did get the victory. So it was cool, to see the sort of big man, smaller man dynamic there as well, because PJ Ellis, if you've never seen him before, he used to go by the name the Kodiak. I think I kind of like the Kodiak better than I do the Peach. but it works within the realm of he and his, I think, fiance. I don't think they're married yet, but I think they're definitely engaged. Him and Sammy, they work very well together, so it works in the context of what they've got going. Third match there was actually an 8-man scramble that would determine the new number one contender for the Soda City Championship. The Soda City Championship is PCW's sort of mid-tier title. It would be very much equivalent to like a Intercontinental type belt there, or a TV title if they had TV. In the match, you had Jesse Barton, Meltman, Donnie Ray, Starboy, BK Westbrook, Kay Holiday, the megastar Drew Hood, Sean Legacy, real Josh Cutshaw, and White Mike. The overall winner of the match would wind up being Starboy BK Westbrook. He becomes the new number one contender for the Soda City Championship. The real surprise in this whole thing is some news that's kind of come out of this match. And the great contest all involved. It was, a situation like this or a match format like this is always difficult to pull off because you have so many moving pieces. But they staged it in such a way that everybody had an opportunity to really cut loose and to show what they were capable of. So it was very well put together, I thought. But sort of the bigger news to come out of this, even more so than Westbrook being the winner, is the notion that White Mike, he's been voicing some very cryptic things on social media. I'm under the impression that he is on the verge of retiring from active competition, which of course would bring an end to the Gymnasty Boys, which is kind of heartbreaking in a lot of ways because they were one of the top tag teams in this area. So it's very upsetting if that's the case, if he's actually going to call it a career. But for some of the reasons that he's been touting, talking about wanting to be a family man and spend more time with his kids and be, that level of person, I can't argue with that. I can't find a fault with that at all in any way, shape, or form. So if that's his wish, then more power to him. Because he's been involved with the business for, I think, 13 years, he said. It's somewhere in between 13 and 15, but yeah, if that's his choice, then more power to him. Fully support him in whatever he's going to do there, because Lord knows he's provided lots of entertainment to people like me over the years. So I would hope that he's not gone forever, but at the same time, if that's his decision, then that's the man's decision. So we may have seen one of White Mike's final performances. There was some talk beforehand to where people were wondering, where they might be, they being, of course, the Gymnasty Boys, because there was talk here back earlier in the year to where the belief was put out there that they would only be appearing for Palmetto Championship Wrestling in South Carolina. And, that may or may not ever be a situation that has to be bothered with now. So it is what it is. But moving from there, we took to intermission, looked around the crowd. I'd say it was between 180 and 200 souls there all together. Very good turnout for what was their first show back. You had so much concern over whether or not people would actually want to come back. And they clearly do. They clearly have a desire for professional wrestling and for just entertainment in general. Because people have been cooped up for so long, the opportunity to see anything, especially something of this nature, is going to be really profound to a lot of people. So kudos to all the folks who came out and made this show interesting as it was, because nothing's worse than to go to a show and there'd be nobody there, or very few people, because it becomes very stressful to try and watch or to be involved with, because it's like, when someone in the ring is trying to get the fans to react or whatnot, and there's 5 people there, and it's like, yay! And it just sort of dies, It's tough. You want a crowd. You hope for a crowd. And they definitely had one there at PCW this past Saturday. Now, they've already announced the next date. It will be October 24th back at the Seven Oaks Park venue there. So if you're interested in being a part of that audience, might want to go ahead and start looking at tickets. They had been selling pretty good in advance here for this show, so I don't think they would really sell out, but it probably would be pretty close, especially if people see what happened at this event and they say, okay, well, maybe it's worth pursuing again. Maybe it's time to get back out in the real world. And that's the great thing about this, is that if it really inspired and brought people to a point where they said, okay, well, we can get back to this, we can start to be a little more normal, then that would be a fantastic thing and probably the best thing that could come out of it. And last thing we'll talk about in regard to that next show, there was a teaser vignette, skit, whatever you want to call it, played there on the Jumbotron in the venue that did tease the return of Drew Adler to the promotion, which of course Drew is the current holder of the PCW heavyweight title. He's been out of action for quite some time, though. Had to have double hip surgery. Had some resurfacing done on his hips there. Been out for a while, but is now apparently ready to return and ready to get back to action. So we're looking forward to seeing him back in PCW next month. What have I said next month? This month. We're already in October, for crying out loud. My goodness, time's getting away from me. Oh, it does that all the time. And, the next match on the card was a tag team match. You had the debuting tag team of the Influencers. Of course, they've worked together before, but not under this name. You had Chance Riser and Patrick Scott teaming up to take on All Worm No Soul, which, of course, is 5-star Worm Joey Ford and the Ginger Ninja Brady Collins. The Influencers did get the win here, but it was under dastardly deeds because Scott struck Brady Collins with a loaded fist as Riser was distracting the official, allowing them to get the win. Two very talented teams there. I doubt that's the last time we've seen them pairing off in this promotion. Likely we'll see them involved with, I'd say, the tag team divisions elsewhere in the Carolinas as well, because as good as these guys are together, it's just sort of natural booking is what it amounts to. And the main event for the evening, good old Soda City Championship match here between the current champion, the working team captain, Owen Knight, and Body Positive, as he's now calling himself, Fluffman, Cody Fluffman. The story behind Fluffman is that he's had this real, I don't want to use the term lovable loser, but he's sort of the underdog, everyman type that has had this real meteoric rise up from being a trainee at the Palmetto Wrestling Academy to now being this real beloved sort of doughball type character. He's very much a Dusty Rhodes type in that he doesn't look like a whole lot, but he still has a tremendous amount of heart and desire to be involved in professional wrestling. So to see him come up from being, literally nothing to now, he actually did win the Soda City Championship, to being a champion. It's been a pretty awesome ride to see, because it's one of those deals to where if you're a fan of PCW and you've been to a lot of their shows, you've seen this guy's evolution. He's gone from being a security guard type hand all the way up to now being one of the champions with the promotion. So it's been really cool to see how he has developed and evolved over the years, and just pretty neat to see an actual product of one of our local dojos having success and having an opportunity to build some history for themselves. So kudos to old Fluffman there, and coming away with a championship so that he'll be able to defend, hopefully for months, maybe longer to come. Who knows? We'll have to see what the career of old Fluffman has to do with things. Well, that was a very fun show. A lot of enjoyable moments there. Very much looking forward to the event on October 24th. Don't have any card information for that one just yet, other than, as we mentioned there, apparently Drew Adler will be returning. Looking forward to just seeing another show and to really, feeling another sense of normal, because that was something that I mentioned to promoter of the company, Shane Dorr, and to a few other people there as well. It was just nice to be in an environment that felt like where you ought to be on a Saturday night, as opposed to in a house or somewhere where you're isolated. It was just very nice to have that comfort, and it was very cool. So I hope that we can continue to, as a people, work together to maintain hygiene levels, to maintain safety protocols, because that was definitely in play here. You had people wearing masks. using sanitizer, sitting apart from one another. It was just very cool to see and very well done by everyone involved. So can't speak more highly of what we experienced there. And again, very much looking forward to October 24th back there at Seven Oaks Park in Columbia, South Carolina for PCW's next show. All right, folks, we're going to take a break here, listen to some tunes, get something to drink here maybe, and then we'll come back and go into segment number 3 here on the program, where we're going to talk about some of my current TV viewing stuffs. Some things that have been wrapping up, some things that are ramping up. Stay tuned. Be back in a few.
Show me how to lie, you're getting better all the time and turning all against the one. It's an art that's hard to teach. Another clever word sets off an unsuspecting hurt as you step back in the line while a mob jumps to their feet. And dance, fucker, dance, man, he never had a chance. And no one even knew it was really only you, and now you steal away. Take him out today. Nice work you did. You're gonna go far, kid. With 1,000 lies and a good disguise. Hit 'em right between the eyes. Hit 'em right between the eyes. When you walk away, nothing more to say. See the lightning in your eyes. See them running for their lives. Slowly out of line and drifting closer in your sights, and play it out, I'm wide awake. It's a scene about me, something in your way, and now someone is gonna pay. If you can't get what you want, then it's all because of me. And dance, fucker, dance, man, he never had a chance. And no one even knew it was really only you, and now you lead the way. Show the light of day. Nice work you did. You're gonna go far, kid. Trust easy with 1,000 lies and a good disguise. Hit 'em right between the eyes. Hit 'em right between the eyes. Till you walk away, nothing more to say. See the lightning in your eyes. See them running for their lives. With 1,000 lies and a good disguise. Hit 'em right between the eyes. Hit 'em right between the eyes. When you walk away, nothing more to say. See the lightning in your eyes. See them running. Clever alibis, Lord of the Flies. See them right between the eyes. Hit 'em right between the eyes. Nothing more to say. When you walk away, hit lightning in your eyes. See them running for their lives.
Welcome back, gang. Thank you for continuing to hang out with us here on the old Weekly Trim podcast as part of the Rasslin with Redbeard YouTube channel. We've been, here recently we've talked a lot about TV programs that I'm watching, streaming programs, I guess I should say, because they're not all isolated to TV, even though I'm watching them mostly on my nice big Bravia TV here that I have from Sony, all that big 4K loveliness that I've got up there in the living room now. But be that as it may, several programs that I've been enjoying. And just to give you a heads up, when I get into this type of talk, just assume that spoilers are going to abound. Because I sort of automatically assume that the programs, which I'm somewhat falling behind on, if you haven't seen them, then guess what? It's just too late. So I'm going to talk about them as if we have all been on the same keel and we're all nice and caught up, or at least to the point where I am anyway. And that's going to lead off in talking about the first show that I wanted to sort of bring up here. And it's one that has just finished its first season, matter of fact, and that is the HBO production Raised by Wolves. You know, this one, I'm still not real sure what to make of this. It's clearly a space drama. The premise of this, if you've never seen this show before, is that it is a dystopian future, far off. I think it was one point, or it was mentioned at one point that this is around 130 or 150 years in the future, somewhere like that. So multiple generations from now. But the conditions on Earth have degraded to a point through war and other things going on that the planet is no longer habitable. So you have these two groups, these two really warring factions of people who are represented as either believers of Sol. I can't pronounce the name that they're identified with, but they're believers of a religion represented by a deity named Sol. Sol is sort of like a sun god almost. They never really clarify where the premise of Sol came from. So I don't know if this was some extension of like a biblical thing or what, but they never have cleared that up. But at any rate, you have those folks there, and then you have the atheists who, of course, are pragmatic and not believing anything at all in terms of a deity representing the higher power or whatnot. And they have fought wars, they've fought battles, the whole thing there has gone on. And now they're to a point where they've ruined the planet. Everything has been consumed in terms of natural resources, anything really that could be used to sustain life. So now they have to go off and look for somewhere else to live. And they've found a planet that they are sort of gunning for. You have, we'll say, several landing parties that become involved in this thing. You have one group, which is the primary group we follow throughout the entire season, represented by a pair of androids, mother and father. And they have within their landing craft a set of embryos that are going to be something that they are human embryos, that is, that they're going to attempt to raise on this new planet and have them be the progeny of a new run of humanity. The thing of it is, they get there and they start, churning out these little test tube babies. That the food and a lot of the surface of this planet they're on is radioactive. So they all but one wind up dying of what could only be assumed various forms of cancer and whatnot by having been exposed to all this radiation. So then in the meantime, the Sol believers, they show up in their Ark type spacecraft that they have, thousands of people aboard this thing. And it's around this time that Mother, the female quote-unquote android, starts to remember she had some other programming at one point in time. Turns out she's what they refer to as a necromancer. She was a combat android who was capable of really huge amounts of destruction. And she goes off and just waylays the landing craft of the Ark, and all hell breaks loose there as far as you can imagine. But going to fast forward past some things there, because there's some people who wind up surviving from the crash of the Ark, and there's some folks involved there who were not who they claimed to be. And, it metamorphoses into one thing after another. And then it winds up towards the end of the season to where you've got several people who are apparently pregnant. And I know I'm jumping around here, but it's a crazy show that you would have to watch in order to really get all the nuts and bolts of it anyway. But it turns out that there are several people who are pregnant as it gets towards the end of the season. One of them is a young girl who was apparently raped during the transition from Earth to this planet they're on now. It took several years of transition. I think it took like 15 years or so to get to where they are in terms of actual time. Of course, this is one of those futuristic scenarios to where like hypersleep or cryosleep is possible. So they haven't aged, but it's been 15 years. But apparently this girl was raped during the transition process. And she is now, of course, getting close to coming to term. But it turns out that Mother, the female android, is apparently in some way, shape, or form pregnant as well. How does an android get pregnant? Well, she found a way to And again, here we're getting more in the deep end of the show. She found a way to commune with the man who had programmed her. Yeah, it's just crazy stuff. And it's not even the worst of it because, they think, okay, well, she's going to have this baby and it's really developing quickly. Well, she didn't have a baby. She had a flying space leech thing. Yeah, I don't even know how to describe it. But the show ends with episode 10 in such a way that there's really no conclusion to anything. It just sort of ends, and it's like, all right, we'll see you next season. And it's the worst possible ending to a show because guess what? Maybe there's never a season 2. Maybe they decide, oh, well, this wasn't worth the money we put into it. We're just going to stop here. So what did you accomplish? It's terrible. I hate that kind of thing. And, that's the reason why people wanted a second season out of Watchmen. At least with Watchmen, there's a nice, tidy ending to it to where they could say, okay, we're done. And it still makes sense. With this, you have no ending to anything. None whatsoever. It's terrible. I mean, it's good if there's going to be a second season or a follow-up in some way, shape, or form. But if this is it, then it's like, well, I've wasted 10 hours of my life here in trying to decipher what this show is about. But, whatever. It was a show that I was interested in because of the fact that Ridley Scott was involved, and it seemed like it was going to be a great thing, and it's been entertaining. It's been very interesting. But it's just like, please, have a payoff. Don't let me invest this much of my life and then don't reward me with anything at all. Just very frustrating in that regard. But, be that as it may, there is good news. There are good shows out there that are very rewarding. And in the case of the one that I'm going to talk about here next, I'm sure it's going to be rewarding because we're approaching the second season of The Mandalorian. Yes, the supposed savior of the Star Wars universe, or at least the one that the Mouse, Mickey, and Disney Co. own. It's really remarkable how this has been the one thing of all the stuff that Disney has produced while owning the Star Wars universe, that this is the thing that has really brought them the most attention. It's crazy to think that it took a show about a Mandalorian and what people are assuming is a baby version of Yoda, but of course it's not. It's a child from his species, or the closest approximation there too. We don't really know how old the child is, because of course Yoda's species lives to be very, very old. But we've gotten some more news. We've gotten some more cool things that started to crop up as a result of some leaks here and there. There was, I'll say, some tumultuous news here a little bit ago. A couple of weeks ago, you started to see some news about Pedro Pascal, who, of course, is the actor who is playing the Mandalorian. He's actually inside the costume and whatnot. There was some news that alleged that he had sort of had a hissy fit or some type of tantrum about halfway through the recording of or filming of the second season, and that he was kind of on the outs. And the premise of his problem, allegedly, was the fact that he felt like there should be more time given to the Mandalorian character outside of the helmet. He wanted to take the helmet off more often, apparently, from what the reports were. Whether or not they were true, who knows? But the fact of the matter remains, there were a lot of rumors around saying that this was the case. And, it got some traction. But, it's come to pass that, people who are in the know have said, we had a little bit of an issue there, but we've squashed it. So apparently he has settled whatever issue he had there. I don't know that this was really at all true, because you have to think, if he's accepting the role of a character that is a Mandalorian, he's going to spend a lot of time in the armor. And, even though there is premise for a character such as his who takes off the helmet quite frequently, we've seen that happen in Rebels, we've seen that happen in other programs, he was going to be, of the sort of true, I guess, Mandalorian class structure or whatnot that said, okay, this is you. This is what you need to go by here. This is your identity, more or less. And, that's understandable. But you had to think, okay, well, he, as in Pedro Pascal, had to be aware, okay, well, you're accepting this role where this is going to be your identity. We'll hear your voice, but your face is going to be this metal helmet here. And whether or not all that news of him being upset and wanting to, spend more time outside the helmet, whether or not all that was true, we'll probably never know. But I'm going to base at least my thoughts on the idea that it would have been pretty dumb for him to say, yeah, I want to take the helmet off, knowing that the character lives in the helmet. I mean, they had to have explained that to him at some point in time and say, hey, this is the way it is. If he still accepted the role, then that's on him. You can't take it back from that point there and say, oh, well, you never told me. At some point, yes, I'm sure they told you. They had to. It's not the kind of thing that they leave out. They don't concoct a character that is going to be this, that, and the other, and then they turn around and it'd be something else. They couldn't do that. It would be a shit show all over Hollywood. Although I say that seems to be kind of what happened with Jared Leto and the version of the Joker that he had. He was apparently convinced that there was going to be more to that than what there really was. So yeah, that there might have been some genuine issues in terms of the way that was done. But I don't think that was the case with Pedro and The Mandalorian. I think this is kind of a misunderstanding type thing. But regardless, very happy to see this coming to a screen near us in the very near future. October 40th. October 30th. I'm glad there's not an October 40th. Of all the years where there would be 40 days in a month, 2020 would be it. But October 30th, new shows, new episodes of The Mandalorian will be streaming. And we'll get to see what happens with good old Baby Yoda. We'll get to see, apparently, live-action Ahsoka Tano, because guess what? We've got a bit of a spoiler on our hands in terms of her appearance and what she's going to look like as the character. And guess what? It was spoiled, apparently, by, of all things, a toy company. Toy companies have historically been terrible when it comes to trying to keep anything under wraps in terms of a creature design or something that they really wanted to, keep from being spoiled. They wanted to, have a surprise to something like, I'll give you an old story here. The story goes that when Independence Day, the Will Smith movie Independence Day, was being filmed, that the producers really wanted to keep the look of the aliens under wraps. They didn't want anybody to know what this thing looked like. So it would be a really, cool reveal because if you remember from the movie, there's the scene where after Will Smith has been in a dogfight with one of the alien craft, it crashes. He's crashed as well, but he goes over to the craft, pulls the fuselage open there, and this thing sort of comes out at him. And he punches it in the side of the head, and it faints or whatever. But, it was that moment there where you see this thing the first time that they wanted the filmmakers, that is, they wanted that to be a big reveal. Well, guess what? A couple of months before the movie shows up, suddenly the toy designs are released as part of some media event, and they have all the aliens out there for people to see. So it's ruined. You have no concept of what a good surprise it could have been now because of the fact that the toy manufacturer went out and showed off what they had been making. That's a breakdown of communication at some point in time. That may be what happened here as well, because there was some artwork produced by Hasbro. I think this was for the lightsaber edition that they're going to have for Ahsoka. But there was some artwork on the box that is very clearly Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka. It's cool looking. It's very neat, but it was like, okay, well, this shouldn't have been our first glimpse of this character. It should have been on the show, but instead it's on the side of a box. My impressions of it is that it's clearly a older, more mature Ahsoka, which is what you would expect, because in the context of the timeline, she is certainly older than she would have been at the end of, for example, the Rebels cartoon, or the series. I shouldn't say cartoon, it was a series. animated series. There you go. That's the proper terminology, animated series. So it figures in. It's looking like it should be there. And, it's really going to be cool to see what she looks like in a full-fledged episode there, walking around the flesh and not just, this sort of dull, flat 2D image on the side of a box, which in this case is on, of course, your monitor, so it gets even more degraded from there. You lose quality every time you step down with one of these things. But looking forward to seeing all that goes on with The Mandalorian. I'm a couple of episodes behind on the last two shows I'm going to talk about here, which is, of course, The Boys and Lovecraft Country. Last weekend, I didn't stay up on things as I should have, so I got to get caught up here the next couple of days with The Boys and also Lovecraft Country. I've been adoring both of those shows. Lovecraft Country is my favorite, though, head and shoulders above the rest. Really just continued to be impressed as hell with that show. It's such a, I talk about Raised by Wolves being this crazy thing, but Lovecraft Country is much more, I don't want to say identifiable, it's much more consumable in that the stories of family drama and, this issues in terms of community relations and this kind of thing, they're much more understandable and approachable, and like I say, consumable for someone in this timeline that we're in here, because realistically, the timeline that Lovecraft Country takes place in was not that long ago. It's within the past, 40, 50 years. So, again, just a great show. It's still an opportunity for you to jump on and be a part of it, because we're approaching the end of the season here now, but we've still got a couple episodes to go before we get there. So, plenty of time to catch up, and get involved there. The Boys, I think I'm 2 episodes back on them now, so I really am getting behind with that. I've got to get back on track with that for sure. I'm sure by now something even more incredulous and crazy has happened than what was going on at the last episode I saw, which involved a speedboat being rammed into the side of a whale. Yeah, that was just nuts there. So it's another one of those visuals where you can only see it in the context of that show and it be pulled off in such a way that it actually made sense. So yeah, it is what it is there. But lots of good shows, lots of good stuff that is out there. I'm looking forward to maybe getting in on American Horror Story. I never have watched that show, but I understand that all seasons of it are on Netflix now, so I may start tuning into that. And apparently there's a show called Schitt's Creek. It's not spelled like, Pooh Creek. It's spelled S-Chitt, Schitt's Creek. So people have said that's just hilarious and that I need to be watching that, so I may try that one as well. But lots of good stuff out there to enjoy on TV land these days. Tell us about something that you are enjoying in the comments. If you have any kind of a recommendation for something that I might enjoy, put that out there as well. Be glad to take a gander at one of these shows and, give a review, give some insight to it there as well if we start watching it and enjoy ourselves. So we're going to take a break here. We'll get in one more musical interlude, and then we'll come back with the good old send-off that we always like to have here on Rasslin with Redbeard, that being What's Redbeard Drinking? Stay tuned, folks. Be back in a few.
your way. Yeah, all the way up to make a no break. Blow across the home of the Seminole, the alligators and the gar.
Hey, welcome back, gang. Thank you for continuing to hang out with us here on the Weekly Trim as part of the Rasslin Redbeard YouTube channel or Anchor.fm or our Spotify presence or whatever platform you happen to be listening to or experiencing this here content. We appreciate you. We're glad to have you, and we hope that you have enjoyed hanging out with us here on this episode of the program. I want to wrap things up as we typically do here on the old Weekly Trim with a edition of What's Redbeard Drinking. And at this point in the show, I typically am parched. Talking for an hour does a bit of a deed on the old throat, and it's just time for something cold to drink. It's typically something cold. I don't think I've ever reviewed anything that was warm on here before. Anything that had to be served warm, that should be. Maybe I've gotten some questions before about, well, would you ever review other things like, a new coffee or a new soda or whatnot? Sure, absolutely. It's just typically this is a reason for me to have a beer at the end of a recording session. So that's just the way we do things. But, I'm open to suggestion. If you have something out there that you'd like for me to take a experience of, by all means, submit it in the comments, and I will be glad to see if we can find it at one of our local purveyors and go from there in terms of bringing my review to you guys out there in TV land. No, not TV land. This is internet land. Yeah, that's right. Sure. So, for this evening, I promise you I haven't been drinking yet. This is just sort of where I am mentally right now. I'm somewhere between an infant and a 13-year-old. It's where I tend to be anymore, period. But it is what it is. I blame I've got a soon-to-be 6-year-old son. That's what I blame it on. Yeah, right. Like I wasn't this way before we had a child, right? Anyway, this week we have Bud Light Platinum Seltzer Wildberry Hard Seltzer. And this is a very cool-looking can, I have to say right off the top of the bat. It has, and this is an odd descriptor, but it has kind of a Black Panther vibe to it. The color is actually more of a deep purple than black, but his costume at certain times did have a sort of purple sheen to it there. But this is a very cool looking can in terms of the way it's laid out. It's got the Anheuser-Busch logo presented above the other logos here. It's a stacked logo as well, because you got the Anheuser-Busch logo, Bud Light logo, the Platinum logo, Seltzer, the little bar thing there, and then Wildberry with hard seltzer. And then it reports with a big font there at the very bottom. This is an 8%er. This is getting up there, folks. This is not playing around anymore with these ABVs on these things. It used to be, typically you saw between 4 and sometimes like 4.5. Sometimes it approaching the extreme, you'd see a 5%. This is 8%, though. This is really unheard of territory for a Budweiser product, especially because they're usually around that 4.2% with these things. But this is, as we said, Bud Light Platinum Seltzer Wildberry in terms of the flavor variety. I don't know if there are that many of these things in terms of the flavor varieties that are out there. This one we just happened to see on the shelf at one of our local gas stations, because I've described before on this show how typically whenever I'm buying something to review, I try and buy something that I can pick up as a single as opposed to a 6-pack, because if I have to buy 6 of them and I wind up hating it, the chances are that I'm going to hate everything that company makes from that point forward. That's just the way I am. But with these, to where you can buy singles. It works out in my favor. So that's what this was. And we got it home, got it good, nice, cold. And now we're prepared to give you a review of this. I first wanted to go through and actually give the description. These cans, they've gotten terrible because some of them, I'm sure whatever box or whatever typical container these things come in, the description probably is on that. But on the individual cans, there's no description whatsoever. So had to go out to the web to find a description of this thing. And this is from drizzly.com. The product description they have for it there is: introducing Bud Light Platinum Seltzer, an 8% ABV seltzer made with agave, triple filtered sparkling water, and natural fruit flavors. This premium seltzer is made for the night. And that might be kind of an explanation as to the color combination on the can here. That's cool. But, one thing that's a little bit weird here, or not weird, but the one thing that might throw this to a different level or to some maybe peculiarities in terms of the flavor profile is the agave. The agave is a ingredient you see in some liquor and whatnot as a sweetener type thing. We'll have to see if this plays into that, because with this being part of the Platinum series, this is sort of Bud Light, and it's all about counting calories and this, that, and the other. So we'll have to see how the agave plays into this as a sweetening aspect of things. But here we go. We're going to pop the top on this guy, and we'll see how it goes. The top, the pop, whatever you want to call it, the pull tab, I should say, has a kind of a pink-purple vibe there as well. So this is a themed can all the way around. Pretty cool what they've done here. And as I struggle to get my fingers underneath this thing here, I tell you what, this has just become a chore here recently for me to open these damn things anymore. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right, there we go. And got it open. And now we will begin the pour so we can give an idea of what the color on this is. I always like to put this into a glass. Any of the beverages we review, I like to give them a pour so we can give you a sense of what the color might be there, as opposed to just, not telling you what these things look like. Here we go with the pour. All right. There we have it. And it is a seltzer through and through. There is no artificial coloring or whatnot here. This is a completely clear fluid. Does not have a tremendous amount of carbonation. It does have a good bit, though. Of course, it's seltzer, so you would expect it to have a fair amount of carbonation in there. Some of these things, I've looked at them before, and when you pour them, even if you don't all that aggressively pour them, they wind up having a head that makes them look like Alka-Seltzer. But this does not do that at all. This was a nice, steady amount of bubbly. That's not the term. This is a nice, steady amount of effervescence that we got going on here. So not an opposing drink here whatsoever, at least at first. So let's go ahead and put the nose to it and see what the aromatics are. Interesting. Not a very pronounced aroma there whatsoever. You pick up a little bit of a berry type flavor, which this is, of course, the name of this one is wild berry. So this could be some combination of blueberries, raspberries, who knows what all they've got in here. Cherry, maybe, strawberry, who knows. But not a whole lot of aromatic there. That's somewhat surprising, because you would think with these, they want to usually kind of hit you up front with whatever the flavor is going to be, and by giving it a somewhat bold aromatic approach, they can usually put that over to you, because you, of course, before you ever actually taste something, you see it and you smell it as well there. Let's put the nose to it one more time here, see if we can pick up anything more than that. No, still kind of the same thing. That's interesting. Well, not a very bold aromatic experience, but we'll see what the flavor profile is like here. We're going to put it to the lips and see how she goes. This, again, is Bud Light Platinum Seltzer, 8% ABV, wild berry flavor. Here we go. Well, I say because I'm trying to process the experience, and there's just not a whole lot there, honestly. It's a nice, crisp beverage. Of course, I get these nice and good and ice cold before I do my reviews here, but there's just not a whole lot of flavor here. It's nice, clean, crisp in terms of the flavor profile, easy to drink, but I guess I was expecting a bit more in terms of the berry flavor, but it's just not there. That's interesting. Maybe this plays into the idea of it being part of the platinum line there, with it being sort of a diet beer or a light beer. But there's just not a whole lot there. That's surprising, huh? There is a hint of berry flavor there. It's just not punch in the face berry flavor, I guess you could say, which is not bad necessarily. But there's not quite enough there. It could be a little bit more, and it would be really ideal. Because it's a very, as we said, clean, crisp finish there. It does not linger on the palate in terms of it being too bold to, be accompanied by whatever you're eating or what have you. There's not a whole lot of flavor there. So it's not a competitive flavor in terms of anything else you might be experiencing while enjoying this. So, yeah. Let's give it a try here and see if there's anything else that comes out of this. Huh, interesting. Well, again, not bad. Just not a whole lot there. And I'm surprised, and I will say almost a little bit disappointed as well, because I was expecting there to be a little bit more of an emphatic berry flavor, and it just isn't there. And I didn't want it to be, I didn't want this to be like Four Loko berry or something like that, to where it makes you feel like you're drinking Kool-Aid with 10 scoops of sugar and whatnot in it. That was not what I was expecting here in any way, shape, or form, but I wanted a little bit more flavor out of this. So it's not great, it's not bad. Definitely a clean finish, definitely easy to drink, definitely something that you could have 4 or 5 of and probably not even realize what you had done, but it's just not a whole lot of flavor there. And I think you could probably put maybe some other type of mix in with this and it be a little bit better than what it is, like maybe some grenadine, for example. That would be the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of what you might use to bolster this a little bit. But again, not bad, not great. Just kind of ho-hum. It's kind of basic, which that's the joke about these seltzers anyway, is that they're so basic bitch in terms of the the whole thing. And this I guess you would say is pretty much in that ballpark in terms of it being a very basic beverage that just about anybody could approach and enjoy. This is one of those things where it's hard to give a real honest and clever review to, because is it bad? No. Is it what we wanted? Is it what we expected? Is it what we thought we were going to get? No. So I don't want to give it a bad score because it's not a quality product. The quality is actually quite high. But I don't enjoy this though, because it's not really what I was hoping for. So we're gonna put it right in the middle of the road. We're gonna give this a 5 out of 10. Drinkable for sure. You could put down these very easily. But in terms of would you really want to? I don't know. It's one of these things where if it had just a little bit more flavor to it, it would be fantastic. And it's not bad as is, but it's too much water and not enough wild berry. If that at all makes sense. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that they found a way to put booze in seltzer, but whatever. It is what it is, folks. And this one, I'm going to finish this one, but I don't think I'll really ever have a reason to search these out again, because if there are even other varieties of this thing out there, there probably are. Knowing the way these things go, you get a variety pack and you've got 6 different varieties of this damn thing. Because it's not that, you have kind of a base product and then you insert a flavor into it. So I'm sure that's what they've done here as well. But as we said, this one's getting about a 5 out of 10 there. Easy to drink, just not a whole lot there in terms of flavor. But we hope that there's been plenty of flavor in this episode of the Weekly Trim. We're glad you guys hung around with us for the entire time here. We're glad that you took a part in what we were doing with this show, and we're glad to have you, period. If you enjoyed what you had here on the show this evening, please give us a like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stuff that we as YouTubers and online personalities are supposed to beg you for. Folks, if you have not already, please remember to wear your mask, remember to wash your damn mask, and I'll meet you further on up the road.